We begin 16 to early years of the war, talking about the very first land battle of the war, which was called Battle of Bull Run, or also known as Manassas Junction. So as we go to the next slide here, we'll take a look at that. So it's called Battle of Bull Run because a Bull Run creek ran through the battlefield. The South would call it Manassas or Manassas Junction because that was the nearest town near the battlefield. If you look over here, you can sort of see this is Washington, D.C., and so the Union marched out trying to basically take this rail junction here in Manassas at the time. So the date that it occurs is 1861 in July. So basically Manassas goes right here on your study guide. And then we put July 21st, 1861. It was a Sunday. So hopefully we have that down. At the battle, you have the Union commanded by this man, Irvin McDowell. He commands about 30,000 Union troops. They're all very inexperienced, not really sure what they're doing, but he is instructed to basically march on the rebels and take possession of Manassas. Who are the generals on the southern side? Well, you have two. So the first one would be Thomas J. Jackson, better known as Stonewall. So here's a photograph of him turned into a painting. And then the other one was the hero of Fort Sumter. That would be P.G.T. Beauregard. So we have these two men leading Southern forces there, stopping the Union as they are trying to cross Bull Run Creek and approach Manassas. So, why is the battle important? Okay, well, if you look down here talking about earning nicknames, that would go with Thomas J. Jackson. So the person and the side that won this battle would be the Confederates, shockingly. The Union was sure that they were able to beat the Confederates, and the Confederates thought the same way. But it was considered a easy victory for the Confederates as they basically held and then counterattacked, and the Union Army, being poorly trained, basically broke and ran at the end of the battle. Some of the things that we should have, already talked about that, is amazingly there were spectators that came to watch the battle. The Confederates, as I had mentioned, were able to hold, and then they counterattacked, forcing a Union retreat. And that's when Jackson was basically complimented by his soldiers, who somebody said, there he is, standing like a stone wall, and the name stuck. And so he becomes Stonewall Jackson from that point on. So it is considered the first land battle of the war. Yes, we did have Fort Sumter, but basically that was a bunch of men inside a fort that was being bombarded. You didn't really have two land armies fighting each other. So that's one of the major things of the importance of Bull Run. The other one is, other than the victory, is the time that the rebel yell is first heard. So what the rebel yell was Jackson encouraged his men, when they made their attack to charge, to yell like furies, he said. And basically this was supposed to intimidate the other side, which it tended to do. So those are the things that were important here at the first Battle of Bull Run. So the fallout from the Union loss was shocking. First of all, Irvin McDowell is replaced by Abraham Lincoln, and they put this man in charge, George B. McClellan. He's the Army of the Potomac's commander and overall general in charge. Basically, what both sides quickly realize is the war is going to be long and difficult, and Lincoln calls for more men to serve for a longer time, basically 1 million men for 3 years, or the end of the war. So that's basically how we end the first battle of the war. Now, moving on to the next one, we switch gears here and we talk about the battle at sea and how that's going to be an important factor in the war as it's being fought. So we remember that part of the Union strategy is to have a blockade to stop all goods moving in and out of Confederate ports. So blockade runners are going to be used by the South to try and reach Europe and come back in and supply the Confederates with much needed supplies. So as I just mentioned here, you can sort of see the blockade is that, and then the Confederates come up with these ships that you see here, and they basically, the biggest thing is they got to be fast. That's the thing. You have to be fast to basically run the blockade at the beginning, make it to Europe, and then make it back. So when we're talking about these, you can sort of see some other ones here. The next thing that happens is that the South decides, you know what, instead of just running the blockade, let's try and come up with a new weapon that could somehow break the Yankee blockade. So you can sort of see how challenging it was. It stretches all the way from Virginia all the way over here to Texas. So As we talk about that, the Confederates begin to build something known as an ironclad, and clad, of course, means covered. So what they do is they basically come up with a plan. How can we break the Union blockade? Well, they gain control of Norfolk, which is down in Virginia, and the Union is able to take some of the ships out before the Confederates get possession of it, but not all of them. And one of the ships that the Confederates are able to gain control of down here in Virginia, right here in this area, is this frigate known as the USS Merrimack. So if we take a look at it right here, basically it was a warship of the time. More than 38 guns. It was basically a big force, and so the Union tried to scuttle it, but the Confederates were able to save it, salvage it, dig it up, and basically retrofit it, and they rechristened it, called the CSS Virginia. Okay, CSS standing for Confederate State Ship. So this is what they came up with. They basically remove all the masts. It's going to be completely powered by steam, and they're going to cover it. They're going to clad it in iron plates that are almost 2 inches thick. So this is going to be their super weapon to attack the Union blockade. Well, the Union has its spies, and it basically learns that it's going to be facing some super weapon by the South, and so they realize it's going to be some kind of steel ship, and so they come up with their own plan, and theirs is an original design. Whereas the Confederates basically retrofitted an existing ship, this one was basically planned from the blueprint up. And this is what they came up with, known as the Monitor. In this picture, you can sort of see it sat very low in the water. Okay, it was about a third of the size of the Virginia. It has lots of new things. It's built very quickly, lots of new inventions. Most of it sits below the water. And unlike the Virginia, this one is going to be made 100% out of steel, out of iron. But it will only have 2 guns. But those guns will move and rotate, just like we think on a modern battleship. So what happens is basically the Battle of Hampton Roads, sometimes also known as the Battle of the Ironclads or the Monitor and the Merrimack. So you'll hear it a bunch of different ways. But basically the battle occurs right here in the inlet into this area of Virginia. So it is March 9th, actually, 1862. For those of you that are reading and wrote down March 8th, something else happens that day. And it goes out and attacks a Union squadron. And there are 3 ships on duty thinking, oh, what is this strange thing coming? And basically they fire it and the cannonballs bounce off. And in return, the Virginia basically sinks 2 of those of the 3, and the 3rd one runs aground trying to get away from it. So you can sort of see that here in this picture. So what happens there is, on a side note, that's the worst day in the United States Navy until Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor in 1941, when the Japanese attack, is the next time more than 240 sailors die. So we remember these as we approach the Memorial Day holiday, and the major price that the people on board the USS Arizona paid. So which brought us into World War II. So let's get back to the Battle of the Ironclads. Just by coincidence, the Monitor arrived the night after the Virginia attacked those 2 ships. And the people that were stuck on the 3rd ship were happy to see this thing, but they had never seen anything like it. And so for the next day, the 2 ships basically pound away at each other. You can sort of see it here, how much smaller the Monitor is to the Virginia. And you can sort of see some of the other ships on blockade duty kind of watching what's going on here. So they run into each other, they pound at each other, the turrets spin, it's deafening on both sides inside the actual ships. And basically it's a draw. Neither side wins, neither side loses. But they'll never fight again. Both of them actually don't survive the year. This happens in March. By the end of the year, the Monitor actually, seen here, you can sort of see some of the cannonball dents. You can see other ones here. Basically sinks off the Carolina coast down in December. It was being drugged down there for blockade duty, and takes on too much water. It's not really meant to be on the high seas, and it sinks. So if you're ever looking for it, it's basically down here off the Outer Banks, and you can sort of see this little spot right there. And then the Confederates eventually lose control of Norfolk, where they actually built the Virginia, and they, instead of giving it over, they blow up the Virginia so it doesn't fall into Union hands. So that's what happens. But the point of this is that it's the first time iron ships fight, and it's going to change the world. because they now realize that wood navies are going to be obsolete, and everyone begins the process of trying to come up with the technology to build these new awesome naval warfare ships that's going to basically change the world. The next pictures I show you, the United States Navy divers actually recovered and found the Monitor. And so you'll see it right here. You can sort of see the outline of the hull right here. But obviously this went down in December of 1862. This would be the turret. This is sort of the thing they were really looking for. And they were able to salvage this and bring it back up. So the next thing is we're going to switch gears here, and we're going to go away from the war at sea and talk about this first Union victory of the war, and it was known as the Battle of Shiloh. So let's talk about that. Okay, so what we have to talk about is to understand that in war sometimes they refer to sections or regions or areas where battles happen as theaters. And in the Civil War there's many theaters, there's 4 or 5, but the two main theaters are going to be the Eastern Theater that pretty much make up Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia, where a bulk of the battles are going to occur in Virginia. But then you're also going to have the Western Theater. So this Battle of Shiloh actually occurs in the Western Theater. So let's talk about it. Okay, so there we got Eastern Theater and we have the Western Theater. So the Battle of Shiloh occurs in Tennessee. So you can sort of see, remember, Kentucky is a border state, but Tennessee is a Confederate state. You can sort of see how these rivers are going to be used as access points. So what is happening here is that the Union is trying to invade Tennessee and get control of it. And in April of 1862, there is a 2-day battle. So this is unlike Battle of Bull Run, that's just a single day. But this one's very, very important because of a few factors. So first of all, we maybe have heard of Ulysses S. Grant. He's going to be president one day. He's on the $50 bill. Well, here he is. He is a commander and a general in the Army of the Union in the West. So he is basically driving his army of about 40,000 strong into Tennessee. And his plan is to try and get all the way through Tennessee and into upper Mississippi, try and reach a little rail junction in Corinth. But he doesn't get there. He's stopped by 2 Confederate commanders and their force of about the same number, about 40 or 50,000. And they are, again, here he is, P.G.T. Beauregard, and this new guy who you've never heard of. His name was Albert Sidney Johnston. He was actually second in command of the Union Army at the time of Fort Sumter, but he basically resigns and takes his powers and responsibility and all his knowledge to the South and signs up in the Confederate Army. So, the reason why it gets the name Shiloh is not for a town, but for a church. And this is just a replica of a very crude, basic structure that this would be the kind of churches that people would go to in the South. And this is where the battle gets its name, Shiloh Church. You might even see some Shiloh churches around now. So the importance of the battle. Well, first of all, it's going to be the biggest battle of the war so far. So by the time it's all over, I know I quoted you like 40 and 50, you're going to have 100,000 men, because basically the Union's going to be reinforced the second day with about 25,000 extra troops. The other thing is, it is the first major Union victory of the war. It occurs in the West. But while Tennessee becomes partially in control, the casualties, the killed, the wounded, and the missing are just shocking and staggering. You have more than 3,000 men killed when you combine both Union and Confederate. 1 in 4 soldiers is a casualty. That means they are either killed or wounded or missing. What happens here is you have more casualties in this battle than you have in all the previous American wars combined. Remember that, folks, that you're talking the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and the Mexican War. In this 2-day battle in Tennessee, you had more casualties racked up in those 2 days than you did in all the others. And that was just shocking. So Grant is sometimes criticized for this victory and refer to him as a butcher, that he just threw soldiers at the Confederate guns and ran up casualty figures. So, and we're going to switch gears again, because as Grant and his army in the West is making its way through Tennessee, we go back to the war at sea and we talk about a Confederate city that is captured, that is very crucial to the Confederate war effort, and it is devastating that they lose it basically at the end of April. So they lose the Battle of Shiloh at the beginning of April, and then we go right down here to which Confederate city was captured. Well, that Confederate city would be New Orleans. New Orleans is captured, and that is a major fall for the Union, or for the Confederacy, excuse me. So this man, David Farragut, is a Union admiral, because that's how they dress for it if you were at sea. He basically is able to control and bombard New Orleans into surrender, and the Confederates lose a large portion of the Mississippi River. Not all of it, but definitely the place where most things are going to be going in and out of in New Orleans. So if we take a look down here, we sort of see there's New Orleans right there, okay? And obviously this little thing right here, that would be the Mississippi River. So this portion up through basically into Louisiana here is now under the control of the Union forces, which is a major loss to the Confederacy. So as we go back and we remember the Battle of Bull Run happened in July of 1861, and they get a new commander. Well, that new commander is an excellent organizer. He's an excellent trainer, but he takes about the next 9 months to come up with his new campaign. And the Union commander of McClellan's going to basically conduct what he's going to call the Peninsular campaign, and he is going to basically try a different strategy. And that strategy is, instead of going overland, he is going to move his army down by water to the Virginia Peninsula and approach Richmond from the east, marching west with his army. So let me show you. Okay. So as we see, here's Washington. Previous commanders had kind of wanted to come down this way. Well, McClellan said, no, I'm going to take and use Navy transports to move my army of 120,000 strong down here. So this is why it takes, months and months for him to get this operation underway. Okay, called the Peninsula Campaign. Peninsula being obviously a piece of land surrounded by water on 3 sides. Okay, so we're talking spring and summer of 1862. Union commander, as we had just mentioned, is George B. McClellan and the Army of the Potomac. So McClellan's plan is to move down through the Chesapeake, beginning in spring, drags into early summer, and basically around June, he gets his army close down here on the peninsula, and they begin their movement up the peninsula towards Richmond. Okay, so we're talking summer of 1862. There are going to be a series of battles that occur on the outskirts of Richmond over 1 week's time. So on your study guide, I ask you, what's it called? Well, they don't call it 1 week's worth of battles. They basically call it 7 days. So as we look at our study guide, hopefully that is what you have right here. This campaign and the end of it is going to be known as 7 Days Battle. The Confederate commander is Robert E. Lee, who basically takes over the Army of Northern Virginia when another commander who had actually been injured falls ill and has to recuperate. So Robert E. Lee takes command, turns the army around, and basically sets to attack the Union forces, even though his forces are smaller. So just answered that question right here. What man takes command? It's Robert E. Lee. One of the most decorated Union soldiers prior to the war. He had been the leader of West Point. He had been serving in the Mexican War. Lots of things were going on with Robert E. Lee. And so when he left, that was very shocking. Okay, so basically this is what we just talked about here. The Union gets very close. Supposedly they could hear the church bells in Richmond. But Lee takes command using his cavalry commander. Now remember, cavalry is horse-mounted soldiers. He uses his commander, his name is James Ewell Brown Stuart. They just called him Jeb. Jeb Stuart, and his forces encircle the Union forces. Okay, here he is. Take a look at that very aggressive beard. Okay, and what he does is he uses that cavalry to basically harass and get information about what's going on the other side. So that's what goes right in here. So Jeb Stuart, who commanded the cavalry. So that's what goes right there. So hopefully you got it. So, there we go. All right. This just shows good old Jeb Stuart right out here. He's kind of a flamboyant guy. He had this big plume in his hat, and he liked to ride out in front. And so he basically rides all the way around, and the Union basically retreats right back down the peninsula into the Union-controlled area, and it's a humiliating defeat for McClellan. Oh, they don't have this, but I thought I'd share. Another cool thing that happened during this campaign is the use of aerial reconnaissance. Basically, yep, balloons. They used balloons to produce helium, and they would use this on the Union side and get these people into these contraptions known as the Intrepid. Okay, and they'd float them up in the air, and they usually have a telegraph line, and this was far enough behind lines that they could look over and see what was going on the Confederate side, where gun emplacements were and all those things, which is helpful to direct your artillery. So this is the guy, Thaddeus Lowe, who actually came up with this idea. So, interesting thing. All right, let's talk about this. The first time the Confederates invade Northern Territory is the fall of 1862. So things have been going pretty well. They have stopped the Union at taking Richmond. They turn around, and then they have another victory that we're not going to really talk about, known as the Second Battle of Bull Run in late August of 1862. And Lee decides he needs to give Southern farms a break, and he wants to basically end this war. And he thinks, if I can have a victory on Northern soil, I can bring about a quick end. Because they know they don't have more men, they know they don't have more money, but they basically have the advantage right now of the war seems to be going their way. So, the first time results in a battle known as the Battle of Antietam. So the Battle of Antietam occurs in September 17, 1862. And it's also sometimes called the Battle of Sharpsburg, because that was the nearest town to where the battle happened. So Antietam gets its name, again, just like Bull Run, it gets its name from a creek that was flowing through the battlefield. So that's why it's called the Battle of Antietam. Now McClellan is still in command, so he is commanding his Army of the Potomac. Okay, and Robert E. Lee is commanding the Army of Northern Virginia. So Lee has crossed the Potomac and into a border state like Maryland. And his plan is more than just going into Maryland. His plan is greater than that. You may be surprised to know what his intended target. So he plans to invade the North, hopefully also drum up some support for anybody that wants to serve the Confederate cause in Maryland, and as we said, an attempt to quickly end the war. Now, he can't really attack Washington, it's too heavily defended. Same thing with Philadelphia and Baltimore. So his real plan is to actually try and make it to Harrisburg. Yes, Harrisburg. Harrisburg was the state capital. It's an important production place. It was also a movement of trains came through here, so it was very important. So he doesn't make it into southern Pennsylvania. He's going to do that again the following summer. He's basically stopped here in western Maryland, is as far as he gets. So it is a one-day battle, but it is significant. It is the single bloodiest day in all of American history. And yes, that includes September 11th. So we're talking more than 3,800 dead in a period of about 12 to 14 hours of fighting. So yes, this eclipsed D-Day. It eclipsed any other single day in American history. So the fighting was incredibly intense. They basically start at daybreak. They fight all day in various parts of the battlefield. You can see various videos online that talk about the particulars of the battle, but basically neither side really gains a clear advantage. Casualty figures are, as we said, staggering. So this puts Shiloh behind it. And so you have 23,000 casualties. Now remember, casualties are killed and wounded. So when we say killed here, you're talking about near almost 4,000. So another number other than that would be the wounded. So Lincoln, though, is going to be using this victory to change the focus of the war. He had been thinking about writing an emancipation to free the slaves in the South because he felt that slaves had been helping the Southern cause in that it's freeing up men to go and fight. And so if he could free the slaves, it would somehow weaken his military enemy, and he could do it that way. But he needed a victory. And so he takes this victory, and it is a victory because it makes a victory because Robert E. Lee did something he had not yet done in the war, and that was he retreated. So once Lincoln hears that Lee is retreated and over the Potomac and back into Virginia, he waits about 4 or 5 days. He meets with his cabinet, tells them, this is what I plan to do. I am going to free the slaves in the South, and I'm going to change this war from a war about union to a war about freedom. And so President Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, and it's going to take effect January 1st, 1863.